Former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted on charges of lying to Congress as U.S. President Donald Trump steps up his campaign against political adversaries. The case against Comey is linked to his investigation into possible Russian interference in the 2016 election. Trump was angered by the probe, which suggested his campaign colluded with Russia to win the vote. He has long called for Comey to face criminal charges. Now Comey is accused of giving false statements and obstruction of justice in testimony to lawmakers about the case. If convicted, he could face up to 5 years in jail. Now, Comey released a video statement on social media saying he knew there would be costs to standing up to Trump, but he was not afraid of the consequences.
Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she's right. But I'm not afraid, and I hope you're not either. I hope instead you are engaged, you are paying attention, and you will vote like your beloved country depends upon it, which it does. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
The indictment comes days after Trump took the unusual step of urging Attorney General Pam Bondi to take action against Comey and others he perceives as political enemies. But the White House denies the president is trying to weaponize the Justice Department.
It is not weaponizing the Department of Justice to demand accountability for those who weaponized the Department of Justice. And nobody knows what that looks like more than President Trump. We are not going to tolerate gaslighting from anyone in the media or from anyone on the other side who is trying to say that it's the president who is weaponizing the DOJ. It was Joe Biden and his attorney general who weaponized the DOJ.
Cathryn Clüver Ashbrook is a political analyst and senior advisor at the Bertelsmann Foundation, an independent think tank based here in Germany. Cathryn, welcome back to The Day. Now, the American Civil Liberties Union has called this a grotesque abuse of presidential power. Do you agree?
Well, I would agree in that it's the first time since basically, 30 some years that the Justice Department has taken on a political agenda of a sitting president in a personal vendetta, in a personal moment of retribution that has been announced. So it's an instrumentalization of the Department of Justice that basically, since the Watergate scandal, has been sacrosanctly almost removed in terms of norms in American politics from executive power, there to serve as a control function, if you will, on executive power. Now it's become the long arm of the law for this American president.
How did we get here?
Well, the idea that you might be able to use the Department of Justice is something that Donald Trump began to circulate as early as the kickoff of his presidential campaign in Waco, Texas, in 2023, when he told his supporters, "I am your retribution," but meant specifically that he would target individuals who have attempted to curtail his power and his role, particularly in the first administration. And what we saw more recently is that the prosecutor in East Virginia who was charged with looking into these possible cases could not make them stick, could not make a case against Jim Comey stick in a way that he thought he could bring it in front of effectively a jurisdiction and a judicial decision, and effectively had to abandon post not a week ago when the Trump administration and Mr. Trump himself decided to put his personal lawyer, an insurance lawyer, in charge of this case, ending up with not a judicial or legal expert, but what looks like a very slim and indistinct set of accusations, which then the secretary, or rather Pam Bondi, the attorney general, says herself is something that is not fully cooked yet, in the sense that she concludes her own press statement, "We will follow the facts." In the country that I call my second home, that is a country of laws, you follow the facts first, you follow the law first, and then you indict.
The indictment is not even 2 pages long, and you mentioned it there. Career prosecutors believe there wasn't enough evidence for an indictment. They were overruled by this newly appointed Trump loyalist. What does all of that tell us about what must be going on at the Department of Justice right now, behind the scenes?
Well, the Department of Justice has met the same fate as many, of course, other parts of the executive administration, but it is more grave in the Department of Justice's case, because even in the first Trump administration, the Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation, precisely what's at stake right now, because he needed to preserve the integrity and independence of the Department of Justice. Now you see a Department of Justice that is being so politicized beyond Pam Bondi's role all the way down to sort of the middle tier, and is being set upon the president's political enemies in a way that it looks like it's individual or bespoke presidential justice. That is not in the American constitutional normative system how the Justice Department is supposed to operate. And there have been firings galore. There have been chairs moving and heads rolling galore in order to satisfy the chief executive. That is not, in an accountable democracy, how a Department of Justice is supposed to function.
How resilient do you consider the Department of Justice to be? Is it built to withstand attempts of abuse?
Well, if you were to listen to James Comey himself, he seems to have more faith in the wider judicial system than some who have observed over the past months, truly, how the justice system has taken instruction from the highest office in the land. And of course, the official, well, the Truth Social post that was directly directed to the Attorney General by name to tell her to go after his personal enemies and to do so quickly doesn't seem to indicate that there is sort of a quick turnaround or recovery strategy where Pam Bondi takes back control of her own department. So I do worry, because what's happening here is that trust in the justice system and in the functionality of the department to control executive action, if you will, or to serve as one of the checks and balances, that trust is being eroded for the American people and in front of the American people's eyes. Jim Comey thinks that having a full trial will help restore that, and maybe that's the case, but that's something that, frankly, only time will tell.
Cathryn, we're seeing a crackdown on the media, Trump's political opponents being pursued by the justice system. Pages right out of the authoritarian playbook, frankly. Is the U.S. approaching a point of no return here?
Well, I think the fact that you have effectively eliminated all the functions of checks and balances in the American system that truly give life to the way that the American Constitution has operated, in the extension of the Declaration of Independence, which the United States will be celebrating in July of next year, we're very close, if not already finally past the tipping point where we get into fully authoritarian structures, because Congress is no longer functional in terms of an accountability mechanism. Russell Vought and the Office of Management and Budget has made sure that Congress has lost its role, its control of the purse. We're likely to have a government shutdown looming now. We have seen that the really truly long arm of the law in the Supreme Court, if you will, those decisions have gone more toward in the president's favor, have further enabled his idea of the unitary executive theory that really creates out of Article 2 something that the founding fathers never intended, which puts the president fundamentally in charge of all institutions of government. That is a fundamental and unconstitutional shift to how democracy is supposed to work, the checks and balances are supposed to work. And by the way, the press that we consider the fourth estate in the nation, to force it into a role where its independence is questioned, is weakened, is bound into commercial interests, truly, that is not the sign of a robust democracy.
There might be some people watching now thinking, okay, this is the former head of the FBI. All the things that you just listed, that's happening in Washington, that's very far away from my lived reality. What do I care? But tell me, what does this indictment and what it stands for and everything we've been seeing over the past weeks mean for Americans?
Well, there are two things happening at the same time. What this indictment indicates, singled out by a politicized American Justice Department, and your life, your experience. And I'll remind you that Jim Comey is not necessarily a figure that is very popular on both the right or the left because of his decisions around Hillary Clinton's email server. But nonetheless, this makes clear to the American public that you could be next. And the fact that DOJ has cleaned up and turned over American data to a massive company, Palantir, that can now pull together data of Americans that was never supposed to align, frankly, in the hands of government, whether it's tax data, whether it's student loan data, whether it's health data. There is something quite nefarious going on in the background that will make every single American more, bring them more into the prism of this government. When you see an American president in the same night that the Comey indictment comes down, sue 6 American states to receive their voter records and their party affiliations of their voters, something is happening here that seems to indicate there is supposed to be more targeting going on. And that's a targeting that would affect potentially every single individual American.
Mm. And it's not just, in this case, it's not just James Comey. The president has called for other opponents to be prosecuted. Last question, where does this end?
Well, if you are looking at it from the president's perspective, this ends with an absolute extension of presidential power over all institutions of government. And we have seen that playbook truly being executed from the moment the president took office. 47% of the Project 2025 has been instituted, and DOJ has done the bidding of major technology companies to run the American citizen from the inside of government. This is a massive power grab by the chief executive. What it does, it carcasses the fundamental tenets of American democracy and the fealty of which so many countries have looked with admiration over the last 250 years. This is the end, fundamentally, of the principles of the Enlightenment, which inspire the American Constitution. And with that, could be the end of the functional American democratic system in the way that we have known it for 250 years.
A very pessimistic outlook. That was Cathryn Clüver Ashbrook with the Bertelsmann Foundation. Many thanks.
You're welcome.
Let's get more from Tyson Barker now. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, joins me on the line. Tyson, welcome. Comey says he's ready for trial. Does that mean he expects the indictment against him won't hold up in court?
No, I mean, he said himself he's innocent. The next steps will be that he will be arraigned on October 9th. And my assumption is that he's going in this quite confident that they will not be able to prove that he is guilty on the 2 charges leveled against him, that he, in fact, ordered FBI employees to leak specific information as he testified in 2017 and 2020. So I think, yes, he's quite confident that he is going into this able to make his case compellingly.
Okay, let's just look at what U.S. President Donald Trump has been saying about this, because he was writing on Truth Social, and he wrote the following, and I quote, "Justice in America, one of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to, is James Comey, the former corrupt head of the FBI." Tyson, Democratic leaders have called Comey's indictment a dangerous abuse of power. Would you agree?
You know, one of the strengths of the Justice Department and the attorneys' offices across the United States has been its independence, its integrity, which has developed in its ability to do things against the president and the White House that sometimes they don't find to be consistent with their desires. And that is not the case with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said, I want the Justice Department to basically be an arm for score settling. And he has laid out a list of individuals, including James Comey, that he wants to see prosecuted. And has been very clear that the Attorney General needs to be pursuing these actively, and Comey is one of those cases. justices. So yes, it's quite a worrying sign because the integrity of the justice system in the United States relies on some degree of independence of the Justice Department, which has been put under question since the beginning of this year.
To help me understand this independence of the Justice Department, is this not constitutionally protected so that there is a separation of powers with the office of the president?
So the judicial branch is separate, and of course that's one of the reasons that former Director Comey is very willing and interested in going into this process, because he still has faith in the independence and integrity of the court system. But the Justice Department is part of the executive branch, and that tradition of integrity and independence has been normative. It has grown up over time. That's why you've seen independent, for example, independent prosecutors appointed by presidents actually investigate the presidents themselves, be it Bill Clinton or even in the case of Donald Trump in his first term with the Russia scandal, that case. But that is clearly not where President Trump wants to be now. He wants to eliminate those norms and bring the Justice Department more under the White House control.
So can we then expect more such indictments against others that President Trump has criticized in the past?
It is an attribute that you see in degrading democracies globally, which is the use of selective justice to prosecute enemies of leaders who are growing more authoritarian. And President Trump has made no bones about making clear that he wants his enemies prosecuted. And we're starting to see that result occur. So I think that we can expect to see other attempts to prosecute enemies, that Trump's perceived enemies, be it people like Adam Schiff in the Senate or others, the members of the January 6th Commission. Of course, there are legal guardrails on that, including the court system and the pardon system. But I think that that's not going to stop him from trying.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, Tyson Barker, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Mike Cowburn is a research fellow in the Department of Political and Social Sciences at Zeppelin University in the south of Germany and joins us now. Mike, James Comey has spoken there about the costs of standing up to Donald Trump. Do you think that's why he's facing charges?
So in reference to the specifics of the case, the two charges center on whether he lied or obstructed the Senate Judiciary Committee during his 2020 testimony. And of course, he was then fired in 2017 by Trump as director of the FBI over these links to his Russian investigation. In terms of the specifics of the cases themselves, these charges actually might be too weak. The exchange with the Judiciary Committee that the indictment references were exceedingly brief. We think it relates to his comments to Ted Cruz, but we're not quite sure. It's very vague, and itself that the indictment is very short. But legal experts are saying that they think it will be difficult to prove, and it's also notable that the 5-year statute of limitations was due to expire this coming Tuesday. So hence bringing these charges so quickly. And so in short, this looks very shaky ground for the Trump administration, purely on the merits of the case. But of course, as I think your question is alluding to, this case isn't really about the merits of the case here. And here's where we get into the real problems. The real problems that this case represents is the unprecedented influence over the Justice Department, which of course is supposed to be independent, by the White House. And when we start to dig into the details of what's been happening in this specific jurisdiction, so Lindsay Halligan was a former Trump aide who has no prosecutorial experience at all. She was appointed on Monday as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, where this case is being held. And one of the reasons for this was that her predecessor declined to bring any charges, basically saying there was no evidence and instead decided to quit. On starting this new job, Halligan was then presented with a memo by her new department explaining why the charges should not be brought, and then went ahead and did that and brought those charges anyway. She herself signed the indictment. This is very unusual. for kind of a senior person to sign the indictment. Normally, these indictments are kind of long documents with lots of evidence. And so this really suggests the kind of long-standing principle of separation of powers is being kind of undermined here.
And while that's going on Truth Social, the US President Trump has wrote, "Justice in America. One of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to is James Comey, the former corrupt head of the FBI." Now, Democratic leaders calling Comey's indictment a dangerous abuse of power. What's your take on that?
So again, what we teach as academics when we teach kind of introduction to US politics is the idea that the US Constitution is grounded in this principle of separation of powers. And that means the executive branch, that is the president and the people around him, cannot instruct either the legislature or in this case, the judiciary to do work. These things are separate. And so what we end up at the moment teaching in 2025 is kind of to the students, hey, this is how all of this is supposed to work. And now here's how it's actually working in 2025 with a big discrepancy between those two things. And so, yeah, this is really dangerous stuff.
Mike, Comey's a big name, the first one. Trump has plenty of other enemies, though. Do you think Trump's enemies have reason to fear that the president will be coming after them too?
So I think we know about the character of Trump that he's long expressed his desire to go after his political opponents, and he's made statements about Comey before. But what we see at this point is clearly that he feels ever more emboldened to act against them. So in particular reference to the Justice Department, there are safeguards put in place that are deliberately designed to kind of prevent these personal vendettas. And they're being completely overridden about this at this time. And so when we tend to think of this in comparative perspective, when we think of kind of different countries and different democracies, what we're seeing here with Comey is kind of exactly the type of scenarios that scholars are looking for when they're trying to look for kind of instances of what we call democratic backsliding, or in other words, kind of countries moving away from being democracies to authoritarian states. So in short, I don't think there's anything particularly kind of special about Comey. And so I would think that, yes, his other opponents, people he's talked about extensively, whether that be Clinton or Biden or Kamala Harris, it would not surprise me at all if they were kind of next on his list. And like I say, the Justice Department have kind of, if anything, more safeguards than any of these others. And the fact that they're being overridden is indeed a very dangerous sign.
Political analyst Mike Cowburn, thanks so much.
Thank you.